412.
Welcome back. Now, it's nearly a year since the resignation of André de Ruyter as Eskom CEO. Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan has in the meantime rejected the name put forward by the board for his replacement. The Institute of Directors in South Africa says this raises complex governance questions. CEO of the organization, Parmi Natesan, joins us with greater perspective around the appointment of senior management at our state-owned enterprises. Parmi, thank you so much for your time today and a good afternoon.
Afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Now, Parmi, something tells me that it's not the first time that the IODSA raises the issue of, how CEOs and how governance works at our SOEs. Let's talk about why you are raising concerns about this appointment process at Eskom and how that filters through into other SOEs.
Sure. So firstly, I think let's just recap that the reason given in the news reports that I've seen is that the minister says the board should have supplied 3 names to him, out of which he would have chosen who the CEO would be. But one of the things we keep raising over the years is why government, who is effectively the shareholder of these SOEs, gets to appoint the CEO. Because government already appoints the board, which is correct. Shareholders appoint a board to oversee an organization. But generally, that board is responsible to oversee the operations of the company. And therefore, the board should be able to select a CEO who they believe would be best for that company in order for that company to be successful. I think it blurs the lines a little bit when ministers on behalf of government are appointing both boards and CEOs and messes a little bit with the lines of accountability in the governance structure.
Of course, Parmi, we've actually heard various chief executives and even board members come out and speak about these very blurred lines of governance here. I'm keen just to get your thoughts. When you think of governance, the first thing that comes to mind for me is King and King 4. Do we know if South Africa's SOEs are applying, the recommendations really? Because that's what King 4 is. It's recommendations, but it's recommendations we all strongly hope that we adhere to. Hi, Parmi, you there?
Yes, yes, so, yes. Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Please do go ahead.
Yes, so my perception is that King 4 is being applied in our public sector, and we have a number of clients in this space who, come to us for board evaluations, for governance assessments, for King 4 gap analyses, and that sort of thing. I think the challenge comes in is that King 4, because it's a voluntary code, it needs to be applied within the current legislative framework. And if there's a clash between what King 4 is saying and any particular piece of legislation, obviously the legislation takes precedence in that instance.
What is interesting here then also is being able to draw then parallels, I guess, between the PFMA and the Companies Act. And if there are areas of the PMFA then, Parmi, which actually do kind of supersede King 4, but even work very differently to the Companies Act, that are causing maybe the normalization of what we are seeing transpire right now at Eskom.
Yeah, I think it's important that we look at the pieces of legislation and they work together and complement each other. I'm not quite certain whether this is PFMA requirement, or oftentimes in the public sector, you will find it's the enabling legislation of each SOE that has some of these requirements in place. In this instance, it was reported that Eskom's own Memorandum of Incorporation, which is the founding document of the SOE, states that the board will supply 3 names to the minister.
I'm very keen to find out from you, Parmi, from the work that you do and the research that you see there. Is there clear evidence that when governance lines are this blurry, it then does lead to operational issues? Because that's what we're seeing at Eskom, right? We're seeing a lot of operational issues here, and we're constantly changing leadership, we're constantly changing the board, and we're not really seeing the operational issues really produce better outcomes. Is there evidence that there's a line to be drawn between governance and what happens with operations?
Look, I think what's clear to us is there's a clear link between stability and competence of the leadership structure and then the performance of an entity, right? So we need to have confidence in the board of Eskom that they're able to oversee this organization and ensure that it survives and thrives. And we also need to have confidence that they've chosen the best CEO to run this organization. And I think whilst we may not have empirical evidence, I think we've seen various examples of it gone wrong. We've seen examples where CEOs are thrust upon boards they need to oversee an individual who they didn't choose, who they perhaps don't feel is the best for that organization, which obviously becomes problematic. We've also seen the other way where CEOs consider themselves to be more powerful than the board because they've got a direct line to the minister. I mean, we've even seen examples of boards being removed because of the CEO putting pressure on the minister to remove the board, and I think that becomes dysfunctional as well.
I'm very keen to find out if you have maybe written to, the Ministry of Public Enterprises here as an organization well acquainted with governance issues and even, I might even say, safeguarding governance within South Africa's public and public sectors.
So we've made various attempts over the years, not only to raise our voice in the media, but also directly engage with government. We also wrote a letter to the Zondo Commission before the findings were released, just, putting a spotlight on some of the governance issues that we felt were a problem. We also engaged with the Public Services and Administration Department at some point on a guide to the appointment of boards of SOEs, which we were quite excited about because we thought it would bring in the best practice that is needed in appointing boards and management to these organizations. But unfortunately, what we heard was that that guide was scrapped when it got to cabinet level. So yes, we've made various attempts, but haven't yet seen any real change to solve these problems.
Oh, Parmi, I'm sorry to hear that, and I guess all we can do is sit back and watch at this point and see how exactly how this specific issue with the Eskom CEO unfolds and what lessons we may be able to learn from it. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. That was Parmi Natesan. She's the CEO of the Institute of Directors in South Africa. Further afield, the EU is on track to implement new restrictions